Hello, everybody. I'm grateful for this opportunity because it allowed me to speak to my grandmother from a different perspective. Never really had a conversation like this with her, and so this opportunity, I'm grateful for it. Thank you. As we discuss the workplace and how it was for her time of work and how it began, we talked about how the workplace, what it was like. It was rough at that time. My grandmother's 83, so she grew up working in the 60s. It was rough. It was tough. It was like all the stories we see, stories like Selma and the civil rights movement and what they had to go through. They had to take the bus to work. They had to walk to work. They had to carpool with one another to work. That's just the way it was. It was tedious. It was hard, and it was hands-on. Most of the jobs they did required the use of their hands. Most of the jobs they did required them to get dirty. They were required to have a certain kind of eye, being able to see the detail that was in the work, and being able to point out that detail when that detail was off or when that detail was missing, and being able to create that sense of detail. That is what the work was like, what the workplace was like for them. It was rough. It was challenging. It was tumultuous. It was sometimes chaotic. It was sometimes frustrating. It was a struggle. But in that day and age, they were determined to push through. The jobs that were had at that time, she said to me, the jobs that were had, they were, you had some doctors, some educators, you had some education administrators, but mainly you had housekeepers, shoe shiners. You had some trying to own their own businesses. You had, like my grandfather was a janitor in the school district. My grandmother was also a cafeteria person in the school district. She was a housekeeper for a doctor. You had some who were stewards. They would sew at that time, making blankets and covers, quilts, clothing. You even had some who were not necessarily a cleaner, but were they would take business persons' clothes to the cleaners for them, drop them off, pick them back up, take them back to the individual. That's what kind of work they had. They were barbers, hairdressers. They were business owners in that sense, but they weren't owning Fortune 500 companies. That's not what it was like. That's not the kind of work that they were doing. They didn't have technology. They weren't working on computers. They didn't have IT persons. They didn't have, some of them were bus drivers, but they didn't have Uber, so they weren't cab drivers necessarily. The work for them, the jobs that they had were more so jobs where you used your hand. They were very hands-on kind of jobs. Work was like continuous. Work for them was constant. The work that they did had to be done. It was, and so there was a sense of I forget the word. There was a sense of works job security. There it is. They knew it was going to be there for them when they needed to do it, and so that's why It was good that they were doing those kinds of jobs. It's good that they were stewards. It was good that they were shining shoes. It was good that they were maids and they were housekeepers and they were working in cafeterias because people had to eat and people needed their businesses and their houses clean. And they weren't going to do it. So grandmama had to. Granddaddy had to. Those were the kinds of jobs that they did. That was what work was like for them. But their feelings towards that work, I love this part because she shared with me that the feelings towards the work were not necessarily love. And I struggle with that because one of my first jobs I was supposed to work was McDonald's. Never did it because that wasn't what I wanted to do. But my grandmother said something to me. She said this: it's not about what you want to do all the time. Sometimes it's about doing what needs to be done. Think about that. Sometimes it's not about what you want to do, but it's about doing what needs to be done. See, jobs they were doing, they had to be done. Those were jobs that were of necessity. And so they found that job security. And though they didn't love it, they had to do it. Though they didn't love it, they were determined to do it. They had to work to get there, walk to get there. Miles, drop kids off to school and then go to work. They then continue to walk to work or walk in a totally different direction to work and then go pick their kids up after work, walk home and do it all over again the next day. They were determined. They didn't love it, but they were determined to do it. They were dedicated to it. They were feelings of joy because they knew what their parents had to go through while working in fields. They weren't getting paid as much, and they had to work at earlier ages. At this time, you're working at about at a later age in life, but you're doing work that's paying you more now. Today, we're getting paid dollars. They were getting paid cent, nickels, dimes, quarters. That's how they were making their money. That's the kind of money they were making. But you got to remember also that times were a lot better in a sense. It wasn't as high. You didn't have inflation. So being paid that little low amount worked. But it was a feeling of joy. They were grateful. They had feelings of gratitude just to be able to work, just to be able to take care of their families, just to be able to have a place that would constantly need them, so they knew they wouldn't be out of work. They were grateful. But they also had feelings of hope. Don't we all? Feelings that it wouldn't always be that way. Feelings that their children would have better options one day. Feelings that they would make it to retirement. They hoped to make it to a day where they could reap the benefits of all the work they had sown. That's what work felt like for them. Those were the feelings towards the work. Though it was rough and it was a tough place and it was challenging, it was tumultuous, it was chaotic, they had feelings of gratitude. They were grateful. Feelings of hope. They were hopeful. They had some joy. They were joy-filled. They were dedicated. They were determined to make sure that they did what they had to do to take care of their families. Those were the feelings of work at the time for my grandmother and for her friends and my grandfather, her siblings, their siblings, as they were growing up and maturing in the workplace. They had a greater sense of thankfulness towards the work that they did, and they had a sense of care for the work they did, though they did not care for the work they did. That's a term people use in my family. I don't care for it. I don't. It's not what I really want. What I want to do. But they put a sense of care in the work that they did. They took care of the detail. They made sure the floors were swept and cleaned and mopped. They made sure that they put their elbow in it, use their elbow grease. That's what some people say in my household. You gotta put a little oomph in it. They did that willingly. They had some care for the work that they did, though they didn't really care to do the work that they were doing. Diverseness of the workplace at the time came from age. They were working at younger ages than we are today. They were working at about 13, 14. Prior to grandmother, great grandmother was working at 8, 9, 10. And so as time has gone on, we've seen that change. They were diverse in the kind of jobs, but the people who work in the jobs, you had youth on jobs with elders, and so you had the young people's energy, but the elderly wisdom. You had diverseness in age, but also in gender. There were women and males doing that kind of work. The males, of course, had the more popular jobs, the more laboring jobs, the jobs that made the more money, the most money, while the women, some of them stayed home. But at that time, when my grandmother was growing up, women were able to work in the 60s. And so the women didn't have the higher paying jobs. They weren't the breadwinners, but they were able to work. And so they were grateful for that. It's diverseness in age and gender. It was diverse in education. My grandmother graduated high school, but some at that time were not graduating high school. So education was a sense of diversity. And the style that they grew up in, for my grandmother, she worked for her children's doctor as a housekeeper. That's what she did on the evenings and on the weekends. I even remember that doctor coming to pick her up when I was younger. She would leave the house on Saturday morning to go to work, and then he'd drop her off back here at the house. But the style was a bureaucratic style. The work was straightforward. The rules were straightforward. You knew every day you were going to be at this house on this day, the house in the city. You're going to be at the house on the beach on the next day. You're going to be working in the office, at the doctor's office, cleaning it on the day after that. Grandmother said that her generation had a sense of pride in the schedule of work, the routine of work. Doing the same thing over and over again was not boring to them. For some reason, they were just so grateful to have work that even though they were doing the same thing, they were just grateful to know that they were going to be doing something that was going to pay their bills, something that was going to take care of their family, something that would help them take care of themselves, something that would allow them to eat, something that would allow them to buy clothes and shoes, something that would allow them to get cars and put gas in it and put food on the table. They were just grateful to be able to be doing something. I am grateful to have had this conversation because I see now why my siblings and I have to go through some of the things we go through with my grandmother, because especially when it comes to cleaning, she has a certain eye. And my family talks about this all the time. Grandma we will clean up, wash the tub, for instance, after we shower. But grandmama is going to come back behind you and do it again. And so my family always says, why should we do it if we know you're going to do it again? But this conversation allowed me to really see she's doing what she was taught and trained to do. And though nobody said, do this, and do it this way, and do it that way, but from working in that area over the years, she found out how to do it. the workplace has changed. The workplace has grown over time because we've seen an increase in finances and work wages. They went from making cents to now we're making dollars. We've seen an increase in transportation to work and work mobility. You're not just working from an office or in someone else's office, but nowadays you have people working from home. We are those business owners and CEOs and doctors, so the workplace has changed from that nature. People are working at a later age, so the workplace has changed in that nature. Women are breadwinners nowadays in families, so the workplace has changed in that nature. What I've found was that the workplace has grown. The workplace has matured since my grandmother began work. The workplace is now different and has grown. It's a better place. It's become a better place throughout my grandmother's lifetime.